the basics of the bicycle. And for this one, I'm going to start reassembling the bike and going through all the different components. Now, this is not a how to build a bike video. This is basically information on the parts of the bike, terms you might come across. As I mentioned in the last one, there's certain things that people mention in a bike, like a bottom bracket or things that you might not know what they mean. So for the purpose of this, I'm just going to build the same frame back up. I'm going to start with the head tube. So we'll start at the front of the bike. Now, the first thing you need for the front of the bike is a headset. That's the bearings that hold the forks in. So for this bike, the sort of headset we've got, just let me show you, bear with me a second, is this. So this, I'll just show you the head tube actually. So the head tube, as you can see, there's a recess in there, and that is for the bearing to sit in. So the bearing actually sits in the frame, and the same in the bottom, so it sits up in there. This is quite a new system. Well, they actually were around years and years and years ago, but recently it's become more popular, especially in titanium frames and some carbon road bike frames and things like that. The other type of headset would be more, bear with me a second. So the other sort of frame is, I'll just use this frame to demonstrate, is instead of having the bearings in the frame just sat straight in it, you've got a cup. So this black thing here is called a headset cup, and you have different types depending on the diameter of the head tube. This head tube they come in different diameters. I'll have to list quite a few, but they come in lots of different diameters. There are set headsets to fit in each diameter, and also you'll notice the bottom one is bigger than the top one. This has come about recently. Like all bike things are all up, constantly trying to change things, improve things. So they introduced what they called the tapered headset, tapered head tube, which means the bearing at the bottom is bigger than the bearing at the top. There's a reason behind this, because bigger bearings tend to be stronger and last longer. So if you've got a bigger bearing at the bottom, it'll be stiffer and stronger, and you have more balls in it, so it's going to last longer. That's the theory. Now what you're looking at is a cup. So you've got this is the top cup that's in this frame. It's got a bearing in it which you can press out and replace. It's a sealed bearing, and it will sit in, you can see it in there, and you press this black part into the frame, so it would sit, you can only see that top rim, but the rest of it is pushed into the frame. And the same at the bottom, you've got this sort of bearing. So this is the system you'd have in the bottom. Again, there's a bearing in there, and you press this into the frame, into the head tube, and this part with the holes in. I mean, this is just a type. There's loads of different designs. For instance, just for the purpose of this video, I'm going to use this one, and that sits up in there, goes up, pushes till it stops, and then that's the bearings, the top and bottom bearings to hold your forks. Another part of the headset is the bearing race. Now I'll just show you what that is. So for instance, here's a fork. Now the bearing, a bearing has to have two surfaces to roll against. So you have the part at the top and the part on the fork, and then the ball bearings run in between so that headset can twist. Now you need a ball bearing rolls on what they call a race. So it's angled, so the ball bearing sits one side and then the other side, and the ball bearing runs in the middle of that race. Now for these types of headsets, the modern type, everything's enclosed in a sealed cartridge bearing. This is called a cartridge bearing. So the components I've just talked about are actually in there. So there's ball bearing under that green cover. There's ball bearings in a cage. They're separated by a cage which holds the ball bearings in there so they don't move around. And then you've got a top and bottom of that bearing, and that bearing then sits on the frame on a bearing race. So this crown race, this is called the crown of the fork, the top of the fork. Hang on, let me just start again. Let me start again for you. So I need to just put this down, hang on a sec. So as I was going to say, you have a crown race on a fork. And you've got two forks here, a suspension fork and a rigid fork, and the same principle on both. So there's a crown race on here, which you must put on. When you buy a headset, this will come with the headset. And normally, that's the crown race. Now this, like I say, comes with the headset when you buy it. And it's very essential that you use the one that goes with the headset. A lot of the modern seal bearing headsets now are becoming a little more universal, so these very often will mix and match, but I just don't gamble that it's going to be. So whatever you do, if you buy a second-hand fork, check that there's not one of these already on it. The person who sold you the fork hasn't checked, and they've left the crown race on their fork. You'll see on the top of here. If it doesn't look like that, like square, if you see an angled piece at the top, it's probably got a crown race on it, and it won't probably match the crown race that you need. So you need to take that off and then put the one on that you've got with your headset. Fortunately, some manufacturers, this is a Hope component, Hope Technology they're a UK company that manufacture everything to do with bikes in this country, and they tend to make the best. But there are other manufacturers that have this. There's a split in that, can you see that? So this helps push this on without a tool. So you can literally push it on with your fingers. So once you've done that, your crown race is then on the fork. If you're fitting a suspension fork, exactly the same. Again, you'll need a crown race to go on the top of the crown. It's called a crown race because this is the crown of the fork. Same here, this is the crown of the fork. These are the legs, dropouts. Same on here. Actually, I'll mention that differently in a minute. So you've got the legs of the fork, the crown of the fork, and this is called the steerer. So the part that sticks inside the frame is called the steerer. So when somebody says to you, and this is a tapered steerer. So I was mentioning just now about the bearing at the bottom being bigger than the one at the top. See how this tapers? Steerer tube tends to be a bit more recognised. If somebody says to you, how long is the steerer tube? If you're buying a second-hand fork, you need to know how long this is, so that your frame, so for instance, if I was buying a fork, and this head tube here is quite short, but if the head tube's longer, and you put your fork in and you find you've only got a little bit sticking up like this, it's not going to work. So you need to have plenty of steerer tube. So you need to measure your head tube and then cater for the bearings, and then make sure your fork steerer tube is long enough. So I've talked about the steerer tube, head tube. Now headset components, you've got your, like I say, your crown race, which goes in on the fork, and your fork sticks up goes into the frame, and then on the top you've got another part, which is the cover, which sits into the bearing on the top, and that is like a cover. But I'll show you. I'm going to put this one together in a second. I'll run through it. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to put this fork. This is the fork that came out of the frame. I'm going to put this back in. The same process really. So crown race is on, steerer tube. Now in the top of a steerer tube, in your fork, in this case, there's a little plug. See that? Now in other forks, you will have what they call a star nut. Bear with me. So in this one, this is another fork with a steerer tube, same. In there, you'll see there's a little nut, and it's sort of star-shaped. It's a one-way. It goes in and it will not come out. So you hit it in with a tool, and you hit it in so far, not too far. I don't know if you can see, there's some little wings on that nut. It's called a star nut, so it's star-shaped. You tap that in, and you can buy a specific tool. I might put a link to a tool, but if you're not sure, you can actually do it if you're really careful with a bolt, but I don't recommend it. It tends to, because the star nut needs to go in square. You'll need this. So a star nut, if anyone says to you, oh, you need a star nut in your fork, that's what it is. But if you buy a second-hand fork and there's one in there already, you're laughing. But when you buy a new fork, there won't be one. You need to put it in. So your bearing pops on. Isn't really supposed to be a how-to video, but I'll put it in anyway. And then your top bearing. So the lower bearing goes in, and then you have your top bearing. I'll do this in components actually, separate. So the top bearing goes in next, in the top of the headset. Make sure it's the right way up. If you see the angle of that, it matches. So there's a bevel. The bevel goes towards the frame. Then you want your wedge. That goes in the top. Make sure it's that way up. But then you'll have a dust cover that goes on. And then we had headset spacers, if you remember. I can't remember where these were, but I'll put these underneath. And then the stem. This is the stem. I haven't actually mentioned this, have I? So this is called a bike handlebar or stem, right? So it basically sits over the top of the steerer tube to hold the handlebars. And on top of that, in this case, I've got a spare spacer. So what do we got? We got forks, fork legs, crown. The crown race has been put back in. Bearings have been put in the frame. This is a headset dust cover, so it just covers the top of the headset, a cover, and these rings are headset spacers. So you basically have, what I tend to do when I'm fitting a fork is you could have this is the stem, as I say, you could have the stem right down low. If you know that is going to be the height you want your handlebars, you could cut some steerer tube off and get rid of some of these spacers. I tend to leave it like this because it gives you adjustment depending on how you're using the bike. You might want the front a bit higher, and obviously once you've cut the steerer tube off, you can't put it back on. So I tend to leave plenty of spacers, and so you can take this top nut off again, and you can move these spacers around, and then obviously you can move the stem up and down. Now the stem itself, there's a part on the front here which holds the handlebars on, is the stem plate, and you've got 4 bolts in this case. Sometimes it could be 3, 9 times out of 10 it'll be 4, and you loosen this to put your handlebars through here, and then the other side obviously you've got your stem bolts which clamp the stem to the steerer tube and hold it in place. But the first thing, when you're tightening up your headset system, your fork, when you fitted it like this, you want to tighten the top first, gently. Don't over tighten it, but this needs to be tightened first, and then that holds all of this together, pinches your bearings together, keeps everything nice and tight. You don't want it too tight, you want to make sure it spins freely, but you don't want any play, because when you get the bike built on the ground, I will show you, but when you get it on the bike, and you can test for any play, and you can adjust it with this top nut. This is called a headset cap, by the way. This top piece here, I should have mentioned. I'll show you. They come in all types. There's a headset cap. That's another one, different sort of make with a bolt, and that, like I say, would just fit in the top. Loads of different ones. Loads of people have different names. You can have them personalised and things like that. Right, so that's that together for now, and then we'll move on to putting the bars on. Right, handlebars. Got quite an array here. Now what you've got to, the terms to do with handlebars, as I say, I mentioned about the stem. The important part of the stem is this section here. This is the clamp size, and it can come in 3 sizes: 25.4, 31.8 and 35. There is an old one of 22.2, but you don't tend to see that very often anymore. But for the purpose of this video, most handlebars will be 31.8 with the occasional 35. So it's very important that you match the stem to the handlebar. So here we have some different bars. As you can see, there's some different shapes here. So these are all classed, all of them are classed as, for the one that, just for a description, as straight bars. They call them straight. What sort of bike have you got? Oh, I got a bike with straight bars. So it doesn't, I know they're not straight, but it's not. Let kind of just show you the difference. The reason they're called straight bars is because road bikes have drop bars. So it's not a drop bar bike, it's a straight bar bike, right? So these are drop bars. Same thing in the middle. You'll have the clamp size in the middle. This case it's 31.8 again. And then you'll have different drops. It's the amount, it's the distance this drops from the top to the bottom. So it'll give you the drop. And then also with drop bars, you'll have the flare these days. So it's the amount that the handlebars flare out at the side. Instead of being straight down, they tend to flare out slightly. And you have lots of different flares now. And you also have width. So these bars will come in different widths. And it's for where you put your hand. You tend to ride on this part of the bar, which I will go into a little bit more detail because I haven't actually got a bike with drop bars on it. But when you ride on a drop bar bike, you can ride on the top, which they call the hoods, because you have a brake lever here with gear lever and brake lever all in one, and there's a cover over the top, which you'll see. I can put a picture to it, and it's got a hood on it, what they call they're hoods, like a rubber hood that your hand can rest on when you're riding like this. So you tend to ride on the hoods, and the distance between those two parts are the width of the bars. And then like I say, you have the drop, the amount the handlebar drops, and then you also have the flare, which is the amount that this flares out from vertical. So flare. Gravel bars, some of the racing gravel bars now are really flared out, and the drop is reduced. So you tend to have your bars like this kinked out a bit. Getting back to straight bars, so like I say, we have different clamp sizes. That's a 31.8, that's a 35, that's a 35, that's a 31.8. All of these two bars here are the same bar, they just come in different clamp sizes in the middle. Some clever person decided to introduce another clamp size for no real reason. And then the other thing you'll hear about handlebars is obviously the width. They'll come in different widths. These are no, they're not. These are about 780. And then you've got on the end here, you've got little cut-offs. You can trim these bars to the side. If you find them too wide, you can actually trim them off. And there's some measurements there to do it. And obviously, you need to trim the both ends the same. Not every bar will have that. Sometimes it's just a little mark like these, but it's just to help you cut off the same amount each side. You may not want to cut that off at all. The other thing you'll notice is the rise of the bar. So it's the distance you've got. If you imagine a straight line, these are obviously not absolutely flat and straight. So there is a rise from the center to where your hand is, and these tend to be in 10mm increments. So you'll have 10mm, you have flat bars, which are dead pan flat. You can get actually dead straight flat bars, or these, I think these are 10 or 20mm. 10mm, 20mm, 30mm, 40mm, and I think there's even a 50. But I think these are 40mm. It might even be 38, just to be awkward, but I think they're 40mm. But it just means you've got that little bit extra height. So if your frame, let's just go back to this bike. Say you've got this is the longest it'll go, and your stem is right at the top, and it won't go any higher, and you feel like you need your hands to be higher up, you can fit a handlebar with more rise, so it'll raise your hands up and just raise you up on the bike, just to make it feel better. You can experiment, like I say, with those headset spacers. You can move it up and down. Some people like a high-rise bar because what a high-rise bar will do for you, if you twist it, you get a lot of change in where your hands are. Obviously, if you see it like that, if you tip the bars, roll them back to you, they're that shape. But if you roll them forward, things change quite a bit. But let's not get too confused with that. So yeah, so the terminology. This is the rise of the bar and the rise. The other thing you'll notice on a handlebar is back sweep. If you look at the description of a handlebar when you buy it or you see it online, you'll see the rise, the clamp size in the middle, and the back sweep. So you see these bars bend back from where my hand is in the middle. There's a sweep back. So that it'll say in the description of the handlebars how much they bend back. So it might be 9 degrees, 10 degrees, 7 degrees, something like that. That's the most common. It's all about 9 back sweep. And then other bars like these have a 23mm back sweep. Now the reason for that is these are general, what I class as general mountain bike handlebars. So they're 9-ish percent degree, sorry, 9mm back sweep, and these are general bars like downhill or mountain bike, just general mountain biking. But if you want to do something more long distance, like bike packing or cycle touring, or you just want a gentle ride around on your bike, you're not doing anything crazy, then these handlebars are becoming more popular. Obviously they were around years ago, but everyone thought they were a bit old-fashioned, so they didn't use them. Because everybody, when mountain bikes came along, it was like, oh, look at me, I'm on my, it looks like a motorbike. But these I like this for a reason. So when you're sat, let me turn this the other way around. That's just not going to work. I'm going to have to show it you on a bike. But anyway, when you're sat like that, your hand position is, your elbows tend to be out a little bit more to cope with the sweep of the bar. Whereas with these, your hands are a little bit more natural position. Because your hands don't sit straight. They tend to sit like that. So if you'll find people that do long distance tend to have bars with a bit more back sweep. The reason these go forward and back is so it takes it allows for the sweep, because obviously if this came straight along and then went back, it would probably be too close to you and stab you in the leg. So these go out, and then that gives you the amount of, because your hand position is basically the same on both bars, but because it goes forward and back, it just relaxes, gives you a more relaxed hand angle. These are a bit more extreme. If we can see these. These are the back sweep on these is a little more extreme. These are the bars that I love, and again you've got hands basically in the same position in relation to the center of the bar. It's got more relaxed head angle. Forget about the other bits on the front, you don't need to worry about that. Right, so for this video, these are Sheila's handlebars. I'm going to put these back on, and what you need to do obviously is loosen the bolts on the front of the stem plate to allow for the handlebars to go in, like so. If they don't quite go in, just slacken them off a bit more. I'm going to do another video on actually how to build a bike, but for the moment this is all about the parts of the bike and what they're called. Oops, I need to put these bars the right way up. Always check. It's busy talking to you. Now final adjustments, I won't go into that now, but final adjustments you can do when the bike's back together. Always tighten the bolts opposite each other. Not down the same side, go opposites. Spreads out the pressure on the bar, he says. So that's the bar and the stem back together.